Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Police Accountability Forum. We'll begin with the formalities. The first is attendance and apologies for absence. Chief, on your side?
There's apologies from DCC Sandford, ACC Vent and ACC Davis.
Thank you. And Mr. Stokes, from our side?
No, we're all present today, Lorne. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And any declarations of personal and or prejudicial interests?
Not from the Constabulary side, Commissioner, no.
None from the Commissioner side either.
Well, thank you very much. With your indulgence, I wonder if I could just take a few moments to make what I think is an important message. The probability is that during this phone call that at least one and probably more calls will be coming into the constabulary reporting an incidents of domestic violence. The sad fact is that the number of recorded domestic abuse crimes has gone up by approximately 30% over the last 12 months. And it's the case that very nearly 1/4 of recorded crime in our county is a consequence of domestic abuse. While both women and men are subject to domestic abuse, the overwhelming number of victims, of course, are women and girls. Today is designated as White Ribbon Day in our county, Norfolk. It's a special day to speak out and to say no to violence against women and girls. We must all of us work together to engage men and boys in particular to prevent such violence. This year, the White Ribbon Campaign is making a special appeal to employers to make sure that they and their employees are well aware and have the initial support in place so that concerned employees feel confident to come forward and get the help that is out there for them. I'm pleased that the Norfolk Constabulary is an exemplar in this regard. And for anyone experiencing domestic abuse, my urging is to take that first step to freedom, as daunting as it may seem. There are wonderful people and organizations out there who can help you. Call the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, 0808 2000 247. I'll repeat that, 0808 2000 247. Okay, let's turn to the business at hand today. And the next agenda item is to confirm the minutes of the meeting that was held last on the 29th of September. And I wonder, Ms. Lister, are there any outstanding actions that you should draw to our attention?
Yes, Commissioner. There's two actions, one on page 6, which is action 54, for the Chief Constable to look into the provision of a satisfaction survey at the end of 101 calls and provide findings to the PCC.
Okay, Mr. Bailey, any comment on that?
So, Commissioner, we are currently in the position whereby we are just about to appoint a supplier that will be doing a survey of all the people that have interaction with us through Operation Solve and our desk-based investigations. And you will obviously be aware of the work that we already do around a public confidence survey. So at your request, we are now exploring a far wider ranging option with potential suppliers. But as you'll appreciate, the figures around surveying 101 callers are a lot higher because of the volumes. And we're looking at anywhere between the region of 30 up to £80,000. So at this moment in time, with the funding uncertainty and the potential savings requirement, which is reaching into millions, as you're aware, what we will be doing is we will make a decision once we understand what the funding position is, once we understand what our budgets look like, and then we can then decide, is this affordable or not? And once we understand that, we'll then come back with an update and let you know accordingly.
Okay, thank you very much. Sometimes sampling surveys can be more economic, but you'll explore all that, I'm sure. Ms. Lister?
And the last action, Commissioner, is on, which is action number 55, and that's for a written submission to be provided to yourself on the ethnicity of all constabulary officers and staff candidates and new recruits.
Which I've received. Thank you very much. And I'm pleased to note that there is a considerable increase in the number of people from other groups in this diverse county that are showing an interest in joining the constabulary. And that is a work in progress, and we'll continue, I'm sure, and I know the constabulary is committed to doing everything possible to make sure that we represent the diversity of this county. So thank you for that. We turn to the next agenda item, which is good stewardship of taxpayers' money, one of my 3 or 4 primary objectives in terms of the mandate given to me. So who's going to speak to that?
Peter, Commissioner Peter will talk you through the paper, and we can then pick up any questions thereafter.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jasper.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. So the budget monitoring report has been set out with the papers. And I'll cover the highlights of that report. The report is based on forecasts at the end of September, forecasting to the end of the year. The constabulary is reporting a modest underspend of just over £500,000, which is approximately 0.28% of the operational budget. So that's very tight in terms of the margin. We arrive at that, well, we got to that figure by doing an in-year review of savings, which generated about £1.5 million. We've repurposed nearly 900,000 of that to fund the capital programme to avoid the cost of borrowing, which is a prudent course of action. Subsequently, since we did that review, there have been some other changes in spending, which then arrive at the 531,000 underspend that is outlined in the report and is shown in the table within that report. £500,000 underspend is broadly the same as we reported at the last PAF. So this shows that the constabulary has continued to control spending in advance of a period of economic uncertainty that could last for several years. So I think that is a good news story in terms of the way the constabulary has approached this financial year in advance of what we're expecting to come over the next few years. COVID-related costs and pressures have been managed really well. They're set out in the report, but Commissioner, if you wish, I'm happy to go through that in more detail as part of the roundup following this overview. The capital programme, just moving on to that element, that has slippage of 10.7 million, the bulk of which relates to the development of the Broadland police station. Additional information about that project is set out in the estates paper. And as you know, Commissioner, we have further gateway reviews around that project before we decide to proceed with the construction element of it. So that concludes the kind of high-level overview of the financial paper that is put forward, Commissioner, and happy to take any questions or expand on that COVID-related expenditure.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jasper, and thank you for a really comprehensive financial report you prepared in this paper. I do have a question related to underspends. In your summary on the first page of your report, you report underspends of £1.496 million, and yet you have just reported to us an underspend of £531,000. What is the difference between the two?
So as I mentioned, that in-year savings review generated that £1.5 million worth of savings. We've repurposed nearly 900,000 of that to fund the capital programme and avoid borrowing costs related to that. The difference then relates to the 530,000 that is left. But since we did that in-year savings review, there have obviously been other changes in spending and forecasts, which have left us with that 530,000, which is set out in the table within that report and is explained within the commentary of that report. But it's effectively the 1.5 million, less than 900,000 we've repurposed with some changes over the intervening months in terms of some of those spending lines.
Okay, thank you for that. You mentioned the impact of COVID, and you do cover that in the report, but I think for the benefit of those who perhaps aren't going to read every page of the report, if you could just give the highlights or the lowlights of what the impact of COVID has been on the budget.
Okay, happy to do that. As I said, Norfolk Constabulary has coped very well financially in response to COVID-19. But if I break some of the issues out, in regard to personal protective equipment, PPE, medical grade PPE costs of 23,000 have been reimbursed by the Home Office. That was the costs that we picked up directly. Subsequently to that, we were then provided with PPE from a central and regional model, so we didn't have to buy that directly, but 23,000 reimbursed by the Home Office. The Home Office has also confirmed it's going to reimburse costs of non-medical grade PPE. These costs have just been worked up and we'll be submitting a bid by the end of November. And for Norfolk, that's a bid of 13,000 or a reimbursement of 13,000 we will be claiming. We've also seen the impact of loss of income. So we have had suffered lost income in respect of speed awareness courses, court income and fees and charges. For the whole year, that's forecast to be about 430,000. However, the Home Office have put the scheme in place in the same way that MHCLG has for local authorities, that we can claim back for permanent lost income. We've submitted a claim that covers April to July for 219,000 worth of lost income, and 2 further claims are going to be submitted, one that will cover the period of August to November and one for the period covering December to March. So those claims will continue to go in. In respect of overtime, this has been really well controlled by Silver Command, so temporary ACC Jules Venth, and we only forecast to be spending 23,000 worth of overtime at the moment in respect of response to coronavirus. And also there's been some really good work by our colleagues in ICT, estates and transport, because there's been additional spending on laptops, on making our estates COVID secure, and getting some car park up front when the pandemic started. But we've been able to absorb those costs within our existing capital programme under existing budgets by changing the way that we look at kit and equipment, and particularly in the ICT space, by stopping replacing the desktops and swapping out laptops instead. So we've been able to absorb that spend. So overall, a really well managed picture from the constabulary in response to the financial impact of COVID.
So you're satisfied that the Norfolk Constabulary is not in any way disadvantaged by the extra costs or the loss of income related to COVID?
Well, there'll be a small amount of disadvantage, but clearly we're getting reimbursed for a significant element from the Home Office, and we've taken other approaches to absorbing costs, and clearly the in-year savings exercise has also helped us absorb some of that cost impact. So we're still, despite those pressures, able to come in with a forecast of £500,000 underspend, which we intend to put into the budget support reserve to help absorb the future economic shocks that coronavirus may well have had, or will certainly have had, on the economy of the UK.
Well done. Thank you for that. Can you comment similarly with respect to the impact of the uplift, the extra officers that have been offered by central government? Has this been at any extra cost to Norfolk Constabulary, or is Westminster bearing the whole of the extra costs related to them?
To this financial year, then the cost, yes, has been covered by the grant that's provided by the Home Office. In section 2.2, which is outlining pay-related costs, we have looked to increase the speed of the recruitment of officers, so that we're expecting to be above the uplift target by the end of the year by 39 FTE. That's because in the following year there is going to be the requirement to stop recruitment for a period as our L&D department get ready to deliver the new education qualification framework, PQF. So But that again, those costs have been reflected in the report and in the forecasts, and we're still forecasting a £500,000 underspend.
Looking forward, the Norfolk and Stanley budget, which has made very considerable savings and efficiencies over the past decade or so. I think well above £35 million is a figure that comes to mind, which is, I think, to the great credit of both Norfolk and Suffolk. That presumably takes us fairly close to the bone now in terms of the prospects for still further savings in the future. What sort of burden is attached to your budget planning by extraneous elements over which we have no immediate control, whether it's national requirements or commercial requirements, increase perhaps in insurance premiums, apprenticeship levy, training requirements, and so on? Does that figure really large in your complicated life of trying to balance a budget?
Yes, there are unavoidable cost pressures that are from external influences. Clearly, one of the biggest in the past, and we may find out more about it in the spending review announcement this afternoon from the Chancellor, is in respect of pay inflation. So pay inflation gives us approximately £4 million worth of pressure each year. So that if we get a cash flat settlement, that means we've got to find £4 million worth of savings straight away. The apprenticeship levy is approximately £500,000 a year, but clearly we can tap into the levy in terms of an apprenticeship model, and that would be linked into the PEQF model and drawing in on that to help provide that training. There have been increases over the years in insurance premium tax. Changes to national insurance have added £2 million onto our bill. There's been changes in legislation in respect of bail, for example, and other changes that put pressures on the budget. And then clearly there is a changing nature of crime in terms of creating additional cost pressures on us. In our budget round this year, there are pressures as well in respect to on our services. Million that was on top of those inflationary pressures that we were already facing.
In terms of your medium-term financial plan, looking back a year or two, what sort of allowance did you make for pay increase? Had you allowed for a 2.5% increase, which was the actual award to officers and staff?
Yes, we did. So we had a 2.5% increase modelled in our budget planning. So when that announcement came through about the 2.5%, we didn't have to find any additional funds from reserves to cover it. It was already built into our plans, and we had assumed 2.5% throughout the life of the MTFP. And as I said, we will find out today, probably from the Chancellor, about any announcements around public sector pay restraints.
Okay, thank you for that. A part of this agenda item includes estates update as well, and it's announced that the planned full completion of the build in the Swaffham was 2 days ago, to 23rd of November, and that in the following weeks people will be moving into, police units will be moving into it. Is the station complete now?
It is, yes. There are just some last minute kind of, the snagging issues that the builders are dealing with, but that is complete and people will be starting to move in over the next few weeks. Okay,
thank you. Lastly, on this agenda item, emergency services collaboration. How's that proceeding in the age of COVID?
Commissioner, as you might appreciate, COVID has rather delayed the progress that we were making. Temporary Superintendent Nathan Clark, who was solely responsible for driving forward that agenda, we had to move him to become the dedicated silver in our COVID response. Nathan's obviously had to go back to that role with the second wave. The community safety draft business case is now with the DEP, It's being looked at. There are ongoing conversations with Norfolk Fire and Rescue Service around their participation in Hethersett Old Hall School as a public service academy. So those conversations are ongoing, and there is a reasonably frequent dialogue between myself and the chief officers with the fire service. But obviously, as you might appreciate, during the COVID crisis, it's rather stalled, and I think that's completely understandable.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's turn to the next agenda item, which is we touched on some of it already. COVID-19 update.
Can I ask Simon to talk to you, Commissioner, about the COVID-19 update? Simon's obviously the joint goal for Norfolk and Suffolk, has been at the heart of our response from the outset, and I'm sure he will make reference, I hope, to the HMI's draft assessment of how well we have done, and Simon deserves a huge amount of credit for the feedback that we've had from the HMI. So Simon, please.
Thank you.
So let the official record note that, please.
Thank you. I may also highlight, if I may, the tier assurance report, but I'll come to that because we've had a good, positive assurance from our auditors around the way that we're responding to COVID also. If I may just give the kind of context, the operational context first. Norfolk Constabulary, like all, I suspect, moved into this. We had plans in hand, but no plan for COVID and no plan for the duration of a virus impacting upon us. So we quickly, as I've previously briefed you, I think, Commissioner, responded to reposition the organisation and put, and I suppose I would say this, wouldn't I, the organisation in a very strong place to ensure that we were still delivering public service. So throughout the first lockdown, the period between and now, we've ensured through good and strong governance, good housekeeping, that we've been able to maintain officers and staff working, prioritising the key functions of the service, both in terms of taking calls and responding to calls. For some reason I've disappeared off, but responding calls and responding to calls, maintaining our arm response, maintaining our ability to deliver custody, as well as the general keeping people working, leadership, health and wellbeing. So we've worked across a very broad front to keep the business running. Now, that's in no small part down to the governance structure. So as Mr. Bailey has said, I happen to be the gold across both, but I delegate significant amounts of work to the silver and the silver support. So we've mentioned ACC, Vent and Superintendent Clark. But we have, of course, as you would expect us to, having to respond quite dynamically, and that response is also linked into a broader partnership through the structures that pre-exist through the local resilience forum. So I attend the strategic coordinating group and Jules attends the tactical coordinating group. So a lot of our delivery and activity is delivered at a partnership level. So in terms of where and what we're kind of faced with at the moment, as you'll be aware, we are not immune from our staff getting the virus, but again, through very, very quick response, we're able to contain and maintain service. So we've had outbreaks, we've had our own outbreaks within a number of our buildings, but we have a process that very quickly identifies, grips it, contains it, and allows service to continue. We're also clearly supporting the wider partnership, not least in public space, balancing our need to enforce. So we're still, it's still worth mentioning, we are still issuing fixed penalty notices, but we're still doing that in a balanced way, commensurate to the kind of way of Norfolk, in that we're still using we're engaging with people, we're explaining why there's a need and encouraging people to adhere. But we still, and where necessary, we'll still enforce through the use of fixed penalty notices. So we still have a number of fixed penalty notices that we're issuing, and I think what I would then just say is that we've got ourselves into a battle rhythm. We're not working, we're not policing, through COVID. We're policing with COVID, and now our focus is very much again at a partnership level, supporting the wider partnership in terms of what does mass vaccination look like. And only this morning I was going through some what I suppose what I would term as police risk assessment. So as the vaccination centres are starting to emerge, what are the policing implications? How do we support that process? How do we ensure that we not only play our role but ensure that the good running and good functioning of those centres? Now, going to Mr. Bailey's point around how do I know that we're on the right track? Very early on, I commissioned a peer review. So relatively early on, you know, towards the latter part of the lockdown, because there was a lot of work going on initially, towards the latter part of the lockdown, we had an independent review, a peer review, which was a very strong review. There were a number of recommendations, of course, but overall, of which we've addressed, but overall, very strong commentary on how we've managed this, how we've governed this, and how we're kind of maintaining our focus on the public. We've also been party to a national HMIC review on two aspects. So our preparedness for a pandemic or a response to a major incident of this sort, and also we were reviewed in terms of our custody provision. And again, although I haven't seen, because they're still doing the write-up, we had hot debrief, of which we invited a number of others into that. And again, the hot debrief was very positive. Comments like you're in the top 10%, very strong governance, strong response to, good leadership, positive kind of positive setting of the organisation relative to COVID. So that was reassuring. And I suppose the last point I would raise is we've just received, and it's not published yet because I've got to speak to the auditor, but we've just had an audit done. So through the audit through TIA, we've got, I think the language is strong confidence or strong assurance. Some very positive comments again, and without a single recommendation. So again, I take comfort, or at least some sort of confidence, from a number of independents checking out what we're doing and giving us a more than a clean bill of health, a very positive review of what's happening. Thank
you very much for that. I have two questions, but before I put them, I wonder for the benefit of anybody outside of our office in the constabulary, Chief, you just explain, you always refer to Gold Command, Silver Command. What's all that mean?
It would probably be easier if bearing in mind we've talked about it in the context of COVID, if Simon explains the various roles and responsibilities within the COVID command structure, because of course they will be different for a firearms operation, different for a critical incident. But if Simon can explain the role that he's undertaken as gold, and then the roles of silver and bronze, it would probably help.
By way of illustration, okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. As Gold Commander, I think the first line in the manual talks about being responsible and accountable for the police operation. And what I am, and therefore do, is set the strategic direction. So I decide what we collectively want to do. Now that we have a good structure, not least as Gold Commander, and without confusing it further, you can go up a tier into what we call Platinum. So because I'm sitting across both forces, and I have delegated authority from both chiefs, I do check in with the chiefs regularly, potentially twice a week, and we've been running twice a week meetings to ensure that the chiefs know what I'm doing, but also seeking a view. So there is a Platinum, without wishing to confuse, given the question you've asked, but ultimately I am the strategic commander. So I set the strategy, I give the direction of where I want it to go. I have some other responsibilities about making sure that we have enough resource, that the finances are there, that we have the right conversation with the wider public through the communications, that I sit at the right level with other partners and engage and cajole partners into the right space. So that's what I do. And I did, and of course you would expect me to write a strategic document that says this is what we want to do, which was all about making sure that we could still deliver policing service. I also run a strategic risk register at that gold level. So all the strategic risks I look at. What then on my behalf Jules does as Silver Commander is the tactical commander. So she deals, and could be argued, with a lot of the more dynamic issues. So she's taking on the delivery of my strategic position and make it happen. So that's the silver. So what she deals with almost on a day-to-day basis is the coordination of what's going on. And then at a bronze level is the operational bit. So it's the person that actually scurries around and makes it happen. So we have an operational, and that could be, for us, we've got operational groups around comms, operational groups around people, which includes health and well-being, and then you would have operational bits around delivering local policing. And another good example is around our public order. So you'll be aware that we've had some anti-COVID demonstrations. Well, at an operational level, that gets picked up and addressed. So Jules kind of has got the more dynamic role, and then she appoints and commissions people to do the actual doing, which is at the operational level. Does that help, Commissioner? Have I?
Yeah, very much so. I'm reminded, apropos nothing, my father often telling me as a boy that when they saw the police coming, and that they would shout to each other, ISBB, I spy brass buttons, which apparently the police in Canada had back in the 1920s, and they would all get out of there quickly. Thank you for that. I've got two questions now, if I may. One is the constabulary itself, and you mentioned that, to no one's surprise, that police officers and staff are no more immune from this virus than anyone else, and that there have been isolated incidents across the constabulary. Is routine and regular testing provided to all officers and staff, particularly officers as emergency workers?
We have the same opportunities as the wider public around if some of our staff or officers are symptomatic, they have the same opportunity to go and take the tests, the symptomatic tests, and we've had that support throughout. And in fact, earlier on, we were party to the NHS's, certainly in Norfolk, the NHS's self-testing. They had their own testing service under a separate pillar, and we had access to that. Of course, as you will be aware, Commissioner, in the early days, the numbers of tests were somewhat curtailed. That has now fundamentally changed, and we do get, again, like the wider public, very quick access. But we have to present with us in a systematic way. What we're not having, or not party to, is mass testing yet. Now, you will also be aware that nationally, that mass testing, the Liverpool mass testing, the symptomatic and asymptomatic, i.e. everyone regularly, is being rolled out. And again, although we're not the lead agency around that, of course we're not, we're supporting public health and the wider health services, that will be coming to Norfolk, but it will be incremental. And at the point when we have sufficient numbers of those, I think they call them mass flow tests, or horizontal flow testing, when there will be a tiered system, and I know that we will be looked upon favourably, but we're not certainly in the first and early tiers.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, we can all understand both the anticipation and the anxiety that the community at large and each of us in our own families feel about the holiday season coming up, and the government proposals to relax somewhat the restrictions to allow families to, in limited numbers, to come together. What's that going to mean for policing if families just can't put up with it anymore and exceed the government limits on the number of household units that can combine, which I think is 3. But what if it's a 5? What if it's 6 household units in Norfolk, and some neighbor phones in the control room to report that? What's the police response likely to be?
Well,
Simon, I'll
okay, fine.
I'll deal with that, Commissioner. The position that the constabulary has taken throughout the COVID crisis has been firmly framed by the 4E approach: the engagement, the education, the encouragement, and ultimately enforcement. And I think we have done that with great success. And we look at the latest confidence figures that we have had from our survey of 1,000 people, they are probably as high as they have ever been, with 91% that have real confidence in what we are doing.
To your great credit.
They think that we're doing an excellent or a very good job. The scientists in the last 48, 72 hours have now come out, and a number of them are now very publicly saying that the government is taking a risk by allowing some relaxation on the tiered approach. And I think the guidelines are going to be around 3 familial bubbles being able to meet over Christmas. But it's being set out very clearly that this is not without risk. Now, from my perspective, I believe that the Constabulary's position should be one of ensuring that our communities understand what the law and the guidance says, our communities understand what the risks are, and that they then act accordingly, recognising that actually there is a potential that we could then suffer a third wave if we don't and are not sensible around this. Now, I would like to think that the vast majority of people are sensible around this. The headline from my perspective is that over that Christmas period, the demand is still there for us. Police officers will be dealing with what I would describe as the demand of families being together, the inevitable increase in reports of domestic abuse, and we're going to be busy. So the opportunity for us to then start to deal with a neighbour phoning up and saying, I think there are now 4 families enjoying Christmas Day next door. The bottom line is, as the Commissioner in the Metropolitan Police Service has said, our officers are going to be busy dealing with other things. Now, I would use this opportunity to encourage everybody to enjoy a very peaceful and happy Christmas, to respect the guidance, to respect what the scientists are saying about the risks that are there. And let's all be sensible, because nobody wants a third wave. Police officers will be out there doing their job, using the 4 E's in the manner that we have done from the outset, and I think with great success. If there are flagrant breaches and there are things like raves over the holiday period, then of course that we will act in a very, very robust response. But are my officers going to be going around knocking on people's doors on Christmas Day to check that there are only 3 families, not 4? Then no, we're not.
Thank you for that. Let's turn to the next agenda item, which is support for the rural communities. This is a very rural county, of course. I think demographically we're thought to be over 50% designated as rural. I know the Constabulary in recent years has very considerably increased its engagement in the rural community, both in terms of prevention and enforcement. And I think some of the figures show that. I'm delighted to see that thus far this year, the stats are looking better in terms of hare coursing. Of course, it still goes on in a substantial way, but the numbers are better than they have been historically. My particular interest here is the continued engagement, not just in the time of COVID, with the rural community itself. And the contact, not just the jungle tom-tom between the rural community within itself, the farming community in particular, but between the farming community and the Constabulary. I'm not talking about a crime in progress, which appropriately would be called into 999, and you have excellent response rates on your 999 calls. I'm not talking necessarily about the events that have happened after the fact, and that represents perhaps a call into 101. I'm talking about the sort of intelligence, that suspicious activity. There's a gray van that's been, lingering too long in the neighborhood, and so on, showing undue interest in certain things. That kind of intelligence on which so much policing is based. How easy is it? What is in place to allow those concerned in the rural community to share that intelligence and have a two-way exchange in real time? I'm not talking about the Operation Randall newsletter. I'm saying in real time.
Commissioner, look, my expectation is that there are 104 beat managers across Norfolk. There are dedicated rural beat managers, and the farming community and those in rural communities should know who their beat managers are. And I know a number of the beat managers very, very well, and I know how frequently their phones will ring when somebody is phoning up and saying, "I've just seen a suspicious vehicle with the following registration number." So that ability to get in contact with those beat managers to flag up that information is there. There is a WhatsApp group, again, as you are aware, which we've been very careful in terms of how we've handled that. So across the organisation, there are and there is the opportunity for members of the rural community to speak directly or indirectly to their local beat managers or to officers within the organisation to get those reports in and to act on them. And I know of cases whereby that has happened, and it's happening on a regular basis. And I think the statistics speak for themselves. I think the most recent survey data, the statistics speak for themselves. And what we have seen is an undoubted improvement of the relationship between ourselves and our rural communities, and in particular the farming community. The levels of engagement are unprecedented from my perspective. I think I went, even during COVID, prior to COVID, I think there were 4 set meetings with members of the rural community, and you were there at some of those meetings. So the opportunity is there. We actively encourage members of the community that have got concerns about what's going on to tell us. We can't act without it, and the results around the theft of plant and the insurance claims that were coming in speaks volumes. The hair courting results and the statistics speak volumes. The confidence figures speak volumes. So I think those relationships are in a very strong place at this moment in time.
So just to summarize then, if I understand correctly what you say, if a farmer is concerned about what he sees as suspicious activity, he would know how to directly speak, not to 101, not to 999, but to speak to his rural beat manager. He would have a contact to get through direct to him.
They should, through the rural beat managers, through the local beat managers. I would hope that those farmers would have their local beat manager's number plumbed into their phone, and they would be in a position to be able to call them and give them that intelligence live time. Yes.
So you mentioned 104 beat managers across the county, and that is a great addition, of course, to be welcomed over the last couple of years. These are additional resources. The fact is, we're also demographically one of the oldest counties in England, I believe. We have a lot of retired people here. We have a lot of people I know in my own local village here who are not adept at social media or the computer and so on. Now, don't scream when you hear this. But what do you think when I went up to my village square last night to look at the community bulletin board, to look for that poster with a picture and a phone number of who my local beat manager is? Do you think I found one?
Well, clearly you didn't, Commissioner.
I'll tell you a secret, I didn't look.
Okay.
But we had this out, didn't we, before? I think it was in Downham Market, and I think the poster got up rather quickly before we had our public meeting in the evening. But have we kept those up to date?
Well, look, that ultimately that's the responsibility of those local policing commanders. There is an inspector overseeing the delivery of all local policing services. It's their responsibility to keep it up to date. I don't.
You're the captain of the ship.
Sorry.
You're the captain of the ship.
Yes, but I'm running a 180+ million pound organisation, over 3,000 people, with all the associated responsibilities and some really significant national working groups and portfolio. So I have to empower and trust my local policing commanders to ensure that they are doing that engagement. And Commissioner, all I would say is, when we shared with you the most latest statistics on our confidence levels and engagement with our communities, I don't think we have ever seen such a positive set of results. Now, that's not been achieved by accident. That's been achieved through a huge amount of hard work and the engagement of those beat managers, of those response officers, of those local police commanders to ensure that their communities are aware of what we're doing, to let them know that they're dealing with the local crime and ASB problems. And you don't survey 1,000 people and get those types of results if you're not doing something right.
Okay. Could I make a suggestion? We seem to have a reactivated NELC operating association of local councils in the county.
Yes.
And maybe they would be interested in an exchange, perhaps you're having one, I don't know, to discuss through their auspices how they can ensure that this information is spread more widely, both through their newsletters, through their contacts with local councils, and indeed using that vehicle to ensure that that information is available on bulletin boards, so that the lady at number whatever Station Road here in Snettisham, if she wants to know where to turn to, or someone's out shopping in Downham Market in the square and wants to know who I can talk to quickly because I'm worried about something, that poster is there.
Well, look, I'll reinforce the message around the parish clerks. My expectation is that local policing commanders again build relationships with the local parish clerks to make sure that type of information is there, but I can certainly reinforce it.
Thank you. Anything anyone else wants to say with respect to the support for rural communities? No, let's move on to the next agenda item then, which is to the police and crime plan theme to improve road safety.
Simon will talk to this paper, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think I won't go line by line through the paper. I suppose I'll start by saying that it's, as you well know, casualty reduction and road safety is a tripartite, or if not broader, responsibility. We work with your office very closely, and also with the as it now happens to now be public health, around road safety. It is a focus of the organisation. A lot of work that kind of goes on, and I probably will just kind of flick through a couple of points. As you well know, we have a focus on the fatal fall, recognised fatal fall that has an impact on KSIs. And as part of that, we do have a focus on the vulnerable road users, be them pedestrians, cyclists, or as the definition is, powered two-wheelers. To the rest of us, it's kind of motorbikes, and mopeds. But so we do have a focus on that. I think a couple of points that I would probably make. And I think I've shared this previously before. There was a step change in absolute numbers of KSIs from memory around 2016, when nationally the crash system, we call it crash slightly unfortunately, but which is our system for auditing or recording all of the road collisions, road traffic collisions, where the definition of serious changed. So what we were originally deeming non-serious, therefore not being put into that particular category, got recategorized. So there was a step change there. And I'd also say, and again, I think I've shared this with you before, Commissioner, we know from the analysis that's done on a national level that there's still an upward trajectory with millions of miles travelled in Norfolk. So we do know that there's still an uptick now, accepting that certainly the COVID period and this year, when we get our final analysis done of this year post the end of March 2021, this will be a very unusual year, because again, as part of the COVID monitoring that we were doing and the data analysis both locally and across the partnership, we saw a dramatic, in the first lockdown, somewhere in the region of 60 to 70% reduction in vehicle usage on our roads. Crept up, of course, and as Mr. Bailey has said, in line with the general demand on policing, that went back to normal. This second lockdown, it dropped not by that dramatic 60 to 70%, it dropped by about 20 to 25%, or that's what we were looking at. So this next year of figures won't be necessarily representative. I am, and I'm acutely aware, because I'm sure that the questions will likely come against the police and crime plan targets, that we're not achieving those, but it's not through a want of trying with others. Appropriate spending of money, appropriate ticketing people, the use of speed cameras, the use of average speed cameras and fixed speed cameras, and of course you're aware of our mobile and community enforcement vans, which again your office has been party to, and our continual use of, and I lost slight track of it, but clearly in preparation for this paper and this meeting, reconnected with some of the saga that we call the A149 that's now up and running and has been since February 2020. And again, as part of that wider response to road safety is now operational. Again, I think that the traditional way of looking, and we're expanding the kind of traditional way of looking at road safety has always been, or was, the kind of enforcement E, the educational E, and the engineering E. So educating people, ensuring that the engineering of the road was appropriate and maximising safety, and where appropriate from our perspective, to ensure that we were enforcing road legislation, particularly with a focus on addressing the fatal four. Now, as I think, and again, your office has been party to this, not least because prior to me stepping out before I came back in, much debate around adopting the safer systems approach, and the safer systems approach is around safe roads and roadsides, safer vehicles, safer road use, safe speeds, and good, what it calls good post-crash care, with good analysis of how that's happened and feeding that back in. So we've adopted, and relatively recently adopted, a governance structure that allows the Road Safety Strategic Board to drive activity around road safety communications, which is about making sure people are aware, but also around road safety operational groups, of which the vulnerable road users, so motorbike group and young drivers, is explicit. That links directly into the Safer Cameras Partnership Board and the operational board, or the operational group, so that we are linking everything together, and that our focus is very much on that safer systems and addressing those higher risk groups. And again, as you're very well aware, that's a broad partnership across us and highways and fire service and your office and the ambulance service, and have been working very hard around the activity that focuses on, and again specifically around some of those more vulnerable users, with a number of initiatives, some of which are our own around the constabulary, around days of action, and ensuring that we deal with certain locations based on need, but also that wider partnership piece of work. And of course, as you well aware, the environment doesn't stay the same. So one of the issues that we're now ingesting or absorbing more dash camera footage that helps us understand what's going on the roads, but equally not necessarily to counter, but it's worth just mentioning, our ability to issue mobile phone tickets was significantly curtailed the end of last year, the latter part of 2019, when a piece of case law was given down from a higher court in relation to mobile phones needed to be used as a communications device, as opposed to what we were doing is effectively, if people were using their mobile phone for anything that was distracting them, then they got a ticket or some sort of sanction of law. That changed, and the government, as probably you're aware and your office is aware, is now consulting on closing that loophole, and the legislation is likely to be enacted sometime in the spring. So the focus is very much still on road safety, particularly around the fatal four, but I am acutely aware that the targets that were set, we are particularly around KSIs per annum, we're not necessarily hitting. And I suppose I'll pause at that point.
Thank you for that. Perhaps I didn't read your report. It seemed to be quite comprehensive. Perhaps I didn't read it with sufficient care. I saw no reference in there to the wonderful cadre of volunteers that get out with speed cameras in our villages and our communities and so on. I think those people are real heroes, and sometimes they face abuse, and they're out in all weather and so on. And finest example you can imagine of a community spirit. And that to me is a spirit of policing as well. Did I miss out on that reference in the paper?
No, that wasn't referenced, Commissioner. An oversight on my part. I'll take that, Commissioner.
Okay, I think that's an important oversight because whenever I'm driving along and I encounter these people, I did the other day in Docking, I think it was, I stop and I thank them for what they're doing. I did the same in Grimston. These people can't be taken for granted, and particularly in this time of lockdown or restriction and so on, I think we have to make a special effort to reach out to those people, to let them know they're appreciated, that they're valued, and that they're making a difference in terms of road safety.
No, if I may then to kind of repair that omission in the paper, I would echo some of the points you've made there. They are part of that wider road safety, as well as some of the other initiatives that are reflected in the paper. They are supported by Constabulary and others, and they do form part of that wider response to road safety. I think that it's an interesting point because our focus, certainly in the Constabulary, is very much around KSIs and KSI hotspots. So that's where the focus and the focus particularly of this paper. I think there is a wider piece I think you're referring to. There's antisocial driving as well that does impact upon, but not as necessarily directly around KSIs. And we value the support from our community speedwatch teams who predominantly address that antisocial driving, particularly in smaller and more rural towns and villages.
Okay, two final points my part on that. KSI is, in my understanding, and I'm a layman, obviously, is not limited to the A and B roads of this county, but when you drive through Docking, for instance, you suddenly slow down with a flashing amber light to 20 miles an hour because there's a school right on the road and so on. So that, in fact, the risks may be actually greater in some respects in certain of our communities where you have children, particularly at school opening and closing times and so on. So I think that KSI is relevant to within these villages and small hamlets and so on as well. Secondly, I asked you a minute ago whether, particularly during this period of COVID, I know there's an annual meeting of these wonderful people. Do you have you put in place some sort of system to keep them fully engaged and collectively through Zoom or whatever have exchanges with them, keep their morale up?
I would have to check, Commissioner, because off the top of my head, I'm not sure, and I've not seen anything recently, so I would have to check, and I'd come back to you on that particular point.
Please, I'd like to hear on that. For the benefit of perhaps a wider listenership or viewership of this particular meeting, can you explain how average speed cameras work?
Yes, in broad terms. Let's go back to why we cite them and then how they work. Clearly, we do a significant amount of analysis, of which some of that modelling is underpinned with national guidance around accident hotspots or collision hotspots, where those collisions are occurring and the impact of those collisions. So we spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of conversations identifying the correct and appropriate locations. We then, and certainly the last one, the surpluses that we get from the driver retraining, which has to be spent on road safety, particularly in this particular example. If we want to talk about the 149 or use that as an illustration, we fund.
So let's start at Knights Hill. Let's start at Knights Hill on the 149, where the average speed cameras begin coming from that direction. So you pass through the first camera.
Yes.
The speed limit is 60 miles an hour.
Yes.
Okay. You come to the next camera. You're still doing 60 miles an hour, but maybe actually you're doing 63 or 64 miles an hour. Then you come to the next camera. What's happening? Do you have to go through all the cameras? I don't know how many. There's maybe 6 or 7 or 8 on the. Is it between one camera and another? How does it work?
Yes. So almost by definition, it's an average speed. So
for Mr. Stokes' benefit, maybe.
Well, we because we pick up the vehicle itself. The vehicle is identified as it goes through the first camera, and as it passes the second camera, we clearly know the distance, and it's a relatively speed is distance over time. So the time it's taken to cover that sort of distance gives you the average speed. So of course, it doesn't mean that your spot speeds are above the 60 miles an hour, So you could pass the first camera, stop, and then accelerate beyond the 60 mile an hour. But the time it takes during that period, we find, and it's not us necessarily us Norfolk, but nationally, we know that average speed cameras have a very positive impact on driver behaviour and driver speeds. Whereas, you know, that sometimes where you can't do that, and through cost, and the spot cameras are also very important around key locations. So some of the you referenced junctions or schools or whatever. Sometimes we would cite spot cameras at those particular, because we want to influence driver behaviour to slow down during that period.
So people can't beat the system, Mr. Midgix, by saying, "Oh, blow, you know, I overlooked the camera and I'm going too fast, so I'm going to reduce my speed to 55 between this camera and the third camera." That doesn't work, does it?
No.
Okay, that's all I want to do.
The cameras operate as cameras. You know, the spaces between each. You know, and of course we do all the necessary things so that we can enforce against each camera, or each block, each gap between cameras. That's probably a better way of describing it.
Do you think that Operation Impact, which was an education tool for young drivers, which I thought offered quite a hard-hitting approach to things, bringing a wrecked car and simulating rescue from an accident and so on, which sadly has had to be put aside because of COVID. Do you think that was really an important initiative?
I think we've discussed this before, haven't we, Commissioner?
And like this.
Yes. I think my view is anything that has an impact, certainly on those vulnerable road users, and as you quite rightly identify, that was particularly impactful relative to new drivers, new young drivers. And if it has an impact, then I'm supportive of it. I know that we've been around this particular block a couple of times around it, and support it. And you know, the police, we've been supportive of impact when we've had these discussions before. So I think if you look at where we've taken impact, or where impact can potentially go, and again, we've had these conversations around virtual reality and some of the impacts that virtual reality, in conjunction with, you know, the mangled car and the conversations and the I say witnesses, it's the wrong term, those that have been previously involved. So some of those that have gone through the traumatic, you know, and young people as peers, I think the whole piece does have an impact. And again, from my perspective, it's also about how do we focus that so it doesn't become part of the background noise, that it has the right impact and it has the right influence, therefore, on subsequent driver behaviour.
So are you working actively with my office and with the Fire and Rescue Service to find some way to, in the current situation, to ensure that we're still reaching out to those young people?
We are still working. And now, specifically around whether I'm working with your office, you'll have to forgive me, Commissioner, because I've only been back in role a couple of months, so I'm now pulling all the threads back together. So I haven't had a conversation, or I haven't yet had a conversation with your office or the fire service, just as a consequence of, without suggesting I'm busy, but I have got COVID gold, and as described, I'm re-picking up the threads of my previous role, the Joint Protective Service, and I've got a couple of other bits and pieces that I suspect we might want to talk about around transition, EU transition, that I'm sitting across. But I'm more than happy to continue, you know, pick up the conversations that we have had and continue those conversations with your office.
And perhaps you could give me some advice what to say to the Police and Crime Panel meeting, which I think is next week, is it? Because the chair has asked for a report on what we're doing to mitigate the lack of the physical demonstration, and I want to be able to give him a substantive response next week.
Okay, I'm more than happy.
I appreciate the priority must be attached to things such as COVID, obviously, but I'd like to be able to suggest some forward movement on this. We're talking about the potential KSI surrounding Norfolk's future, our young people.
Yes, of course. More than happy to pick that up outside the meeting, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Shall we move on to agenda item 8, which I think we've largely covered, which is emergency services collaboration. I think, Chief, you covered that. I don't know.
That's right. I've got nothing further to say on that.
And that takes us to emerging operational and organizational risks. Of course, COVID has emerged and it's still there and is not going away for a while. I appreciate that as one. Operational organizational risks too. We await at 12 noon today or 12:30 to hear from the Chancellor with respect to spending review. We're living with absolute uncertainty and unknowns at the moment surrounding the policing settlement, in particular for us, and precept issues. So there's nothing I can contribute to that, but that is a very considerable risk. Police keeping this county safe doesn't come cheap. But we're working lean and efficient. I'm satisfied that the constabulary is doing that. But we must put priority number one, which is to keep this county safe and to honor and respect every man, woman working in the Norfolk Constabulary, officers and staff who make that happen. Any other organizational or operational risks that anyone wants to report?
Commissioner, you've flagged up the two that I would have spoken about.
Okay. Any other business, anybody?
No, not from me, thank you.
From our side, Mark? No?
No, Commissioner, nothing from our side.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.